Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is John Shaw, the director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute, and we'd like to thank you for joining another edition of our series, Understanding Our New World. We're privileged today to be joined by the Illinois Senate Majority Leader, Kimberly Lightford. The senator grew up in the Chicago area, attended Western Illinois University, worked in Springfield for several years in various capacities, came back home, was active in her community, and ran for the Senate, was one of the youngest senators for many years, was elected in 1998. She's risen steadily up through the ranks and in 2019 became the Senate Majority Leader and is also chair of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus. So Senator, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, my pleasure, Mr. Shaw. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Well, tell us about the early years then. You grew up, I know, and you spent most of your early years in Maywood, as I understand it. Tell us about those early years and kind of the first impetus to become involved in public service.
Oh, sure. Before I start, I should have elaborated a little more in thanking you for welcoming me on the show, but a little bit more. The Paul Simon Public Policy Institute is an amazing organization, and I'm so pleased to be a part of your Understanding Our New World series. And I also want to thank all of you for joining and engaging in this important conversation with us. My earlier years began in 1972, I should say, when my family moved from the west side of Chicago to the village of Maywood. We were the third African-American family on the block, and I had friends from all nationalities. And as a child, it was never an issue about my friends or that we were different in race or religion or culture. And I enjoyed my experience growing up in the village of Maywood. I graduated from Providence East High School. Therefore, I was just always involved in sports and student council and just activities to really keep me busy. I'm the first in my family to earn a college degree. I did attend Western Illinois University. I am a leatherneck. And I pledged Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated in 1988, which was my first exposure to public service in a way that my grandmother had taught me, but it was the organizational structure of how to provide public service, not only to the campus of Western, but in the Macomb community. I then, from there, I went home. I worked for about 3 years with the Secretary of State's office, and then I went to graduate school. And in graduate school, I was working at the Department of Corrections, and there is when I understood what passion meant or being passionate about a subject. And I began to represent the director at every youth serving entity that the Department of Corrections were a part of. Therefore, I served on the boards of the Illinois Association of Park District, the Illinois Recreation and Dance, Big Brother, Big Sister, Boys Clubs of America. I would attend all of these meetings as the representative of the director of the Illinois Department of Corrections, and I learned all of the disadvantages. I just didn't see Black communities on none of these lists across the state. This was a statewide perspective. I didn't see my hometown of Maywood thriving in the area of recreation for young people, which was the very opportunity that I was blessed to have. So during my journey, I recognized that the youth growing up in the community's journey is much different. And so from there, I was recognized by my community leader to run for office. So I started after graduate school. I went back home. My parents made it so uncomfortable so that I wouldn't stay long. I slept in the, I guess it's like the guest study room. This is when the futons became really popular. So I slept on the futon for a year to establish my residency back home. I ran as the youngest trustee for the village of Maywood with a focus on recreation and senior services. I put the very first Boys and Girls Club in the village of Maywood, and I rehabbed the Fred Hampton Pool and all of the parks. A year later, the same state representative, the mayor of Maywood at that time, and one of the community leaders say, "Hey, Trustee Lightford, you should run for the Senate." I said, "The what?" you know, I was 28, 29 years old. And they said, "You should run for the Senate." And I'll tell you, John, I go, "Oh, I can't beat Carol Mosley Braun." And then they all laughed and they said, "No, no, not the US Senate, the state Senate." And I go, "Oh, okay." I know we've been supporting my predecessor. They just neglected to tell me that she was retiring. And so there was this open seat. It was an open opportunity. There were 6 other candidates. So it was a 7-person race. And I worked really hard and I won. And that was in November of 98 is when I was sworn in as a senator. And it'll be 22 years next month.
Well, when you came to Springfield then in '99, you're coming into kind of a different type of Senate. But one of the things I want to ask you about, there was a senator from Chicago who was elected a class ahead of you by the name of Barack Obama. Did you meet him early in your tenure? Did he help show you around? Did he get you situated in Springfield? Tell me about meeting the young Senator Obama.
Well, I'm so glad you mentioned him. I was prepared to tell you a little bit about him in my journey. Because when I met President Obama, at that time, he was Senator Obama. He was the new kid on the block. He was the rookie. And he was Senate Democrat number 26 who had been elected. I won my primary that March because that's when our primary used to be. And I was instructed or told because I was so young that maybe I ought to connect with some of the other youngest legislators. And I know President Obama was still about 6 or 7 years maybe older than I, but the youngest because the body used to be much older. And so I called his law firm and he invited me over and he was just called clout, so to speak. But I just explained to him what my journey had been like and how I had mapped the race out and all these things that I'd done. And he suggested that I become the chairman for the Senate Black Caucus. And now I'm thinking, the chairman, oh my God, I'm not even there yet. So he kind of startled me. But he wrote me a check that day for $500 to my campaign. And I left his office thinking, oh my God, this guy is brilliant. He's attractive and he's writing checks. I can't wait to be his colleague. So I was sworn in at our very first meeting of the Senate Black Caucus. President Obama, who was Senate Democrat number 26, I became number 27. Just the average senator nominated me to be the Senate chairman. And it was second. They voted. It happened so quickly. And then I was in that role for the next 8 years of my first 8 years as a freshman legislator. And Barack was still there for like 6 of those 8 years. So we served together for 6 years. We were very good friends. And I always knew he was on a path. I just had no idea that his path would lead him to be the president of the United States and the first African-American president.
Did you ever talk about your various ambitions? I mean, just sort of, late nights sitting on the floor of the Senate or in committee meetings. Did you have a chance to kind of talk about your various aspirations?
I did, and it was an exchange because this is when President Obama had first wrote his first book. And we had all gone out to U of I of Springfield. He had a book signing. And after I read a little bit of his book, I was even more intrigued of his lifestyle, his upbringing. I knew for years that he would always go to Hawaii when we were on break. You can tell when he'd come back with his tan. He always spoke highly of his wife. She and I were carrying our children at the same time. My daughter and his daughter are just a couple days apart. And we developed a friendship, but of course I didn't know all the personal that the book revealed. And so I share with him some of the challenges that I'd faced, and some of the things I was still experiencing right then. And he was just always, supportive, polite, almost in this like big brother role, like, oh, well, you made it here. You did a wonderful job on your own. Just keep doing it. It was always just don't, lack integrity. We talked about improvising, like don't give of yourself too much, remain consistent. These were some of the things that Barack Obama suggested to me that I still hold dearly today.
Have you had a chance to keep in touch with him over the years then, or?
When he first was elected, I actually would be invited. So when he was first sworn in, I was invited to the ball, and I had a chance to be in the special VIP space. On his campaign trail, we did quite a bit of work for him, and I saw him often. But maybe after, a little bit into after the first term, I lost touch with him. I can imagine what being the president of the United States is like. And so I didn't want to be a burden on the president. But when he visited us at the state capitol, he was just the Barack that I always knew. He walked in the door and he said, "Oh, Kim," and he held his arms open and we had the biggest hug and we laughed, and he did one of his old jokes and I gave him one back, and he asked me how was my child doing and remembered by name. And it was just a really good short time with him, but he let me know that I was still a cherished friend of his, and I really appreciated it.
Great. Well, then, as you jumped into your work at the Senate, one of the issues you became very interested in, of course, was education. I think you've been on the Senate Education Committee your whole career. Tell us about some of your real passions and commitments on the front of education.
Well, I know for sure that it all began just as being a Black woman, a Black mother, and the wife of a Black man. And then as chair of the Black Caucus, I just found that it was very important to ensure that inequities and disparities were limited as much as possible so that every child in the classroom can have an equal opportunity to a quality education. Years ago, when I first started, I was teased quite a bit. I was not welcomed so much because of those different characteristics that I hold. I really didn't have a place to fit in. And so Linda Hawker was the secretary of the Illinois Senate, and quite a few of them call me kiddo. And I don't know how attractive kiddo is when you're a state senator, but she said, "Kiddo, you mind if I give you some advice?" And because she was the only one who had said anything to me all day, I thought, sure. And she says, "Well, may I suggest to you that you do not spread yourself thin, that you identify with what it is you really like what are you passionate about, and then you become an expert in that area instead of trying to do so many things that you're just okay at everything, but you're not really good or known for something." And I thought it was absolutely the best advice that I've ever received. I then approached Senator Vince DiMuzio. He was like the dean of the Senate, and he was really big in education. He was a professor at the university or the community college in his hometown in Macomb County. And we were very different, yet I expressed to him my passion for education and youth development. And he said, "Come here, kiddo, sit right next to me in the Senate Education Committee." And I've sat there for 22 years now, growing from a sitting member to the vice chairman to the chairman until I became a leader in leadership. And my passion for education, it just grew more and more that I learned from the policy perspective. the more and more I realized the disparities, and the fact that if you're a child and you're born into a zip code where there's high property taxes, low property values, that those school districts have less resources, and they're not performing at a level that a school district that has additional resources, great property values, and have the ability to put more into the system, that they always did so much better. And as the years grew, and I became chairman, I wanted to do everything that I could to try to level the playing field. And I think that the biggest help was with the evidence-based funding model that we just passed a few years ago. And in order to provide resources based on need and to try to bring those kids from the bottom up. Now, I just want to make it really clear from my perspective, children that perform well, children who are from a wealthier environment, I want to encourage them to grow and be more and do more. But I also want the kids who are at the bottom to come up and encourage them as well to do just as good with the opportunities given to them. So I want to level the playing field, not bringing the top children down by no means, but to help bring those kids from the bottom up. And that's what I've been spending my whole career in, ensuring that every child gets a fair shot at a good education.
And you were a critical part of, I think it was a 2011 education reform initiative that made significant reforms and was really touted as something of a national model, wasn't it?
It was Senate Bill 7. And, you know, Shaw, I thought I was going to retire after Senate Bill 7, that I had solved all of the problems of Illinois' education system. But what I quickly learned was that Senate Bill 7 was the first bill in 30 years that had sought to make some reforms to the education system. And it was from every aspect, from the teacher evaluation system, from, kids being considered. President Bush had this No Child Left Behind at that time. And the cliche sounds really good, but in essence, it was leaving a lot of children behind. And then it was labeling the children, the schools, the families as failing. And so this whole failing school concept came about. And I thought, how can we make sure that teachers are encouraged so that when they receive kids that are failing in reading or math or below the level of standards that should be according to the standardized test, that they show that they move the kid, that they get credit for some growth. So there was a lot of work to be done, from encouraging teachers to including parents with the Parent Teachers Association, making sure that the superintendents and principals were being the best administrators that they could be to the overall concept. And then there was a lot of different dives that we took from so many categories. It was a lot of work, but it was well worth it. We just were unable to touch that evidence-based funding model, but we did everything else in terms of English language learners, special education, and some other work around how the structure of 800 plus school districts are governed by the State Board of Education. So it was a lot of work to do.
I think you have a specific interest also, don't you, in cursive writing and trying to make sure that kids can actually write in the way that we were taught growing up?
Yeah, so some of your viewers right now, students on the campus of SIU, perhaps did not have cursive writing. When I learned that a generation had gone by, maybe almost two, where cursive writing was not a mandate in the school, it really was mind-boggling for me. And when I took the legislation to the education committee, I could not believe that some of my colleagues says, well, you don't need a cursive writing. Everything is technology on the computer now. You don't need it. And I thought, wow, that's such a small way of looking at a person's life's concept. I mean, we teach our young people that they have to sign their social security card at some point. They have to sign for their driver's license. They have to sign for their college identification. I mean, beyond that, they have to make sure that they're signing for marriage license or healthcare documents, just very important documents in life that require a signature, not a print, but a signature. And I was in my community, and we had this youth employment program, and children were young adults, I would say teenagers, were picking up their payroll checks. And we had a bank there so that the bank would teach them finances opposed to going to a currency exchange. And the students walked up, or the young people, to sign for their check, and they all just kept printing their name. And the bank kept saying, well, your signature, we need your signature. And none of these young people had a signature. I could not believe it. So I made sure that cursive writing was put back into our public school system as a requirement. Should be taught between third to fifth grade, is what I do recall the law says. But it's important that we all have a cursive writing penmanship in addition to a print.
Well, let's talk for a few minutes on the Legislative Black Caucus. I've been reading up on it, and I know that initially it was kind of created as a study group by Harold Washington and some others in 1966, was constituted as a full caucus in 68. And tell us about it now, because there's both a House and Senate component. You're the chair of the overall Black Caucus. I know you also have a foundation. So give us a bit of an overview of both the kind of structure and organization, and also importantly, just your agenda.
Oh, good. I'm glad you asked about the Black Caucus because I'd never been a part of a organization that was created because they felt that they needed to come together more because of their race. And so I'd understand participation in a lot of ways, and especially learning the Robert Rules of Order from my sorority as a young lady, 18, 19 years old, but then applying it as a trustee in the village of Maywood, and then now as the first, as a freshman senator, as chairman of the Senate Black Caucus when President Obama nominated me. So I wasn't the chair of the Joint Caucus, but I had a responsibility that led me to understand more of the reason why the Black Caucus was created. And so I really enjoy my role as the chairman of the Black Caucus. Has been for the past 6 years, and I'm actually winding down my last year. And so that led us to, how should I say this? So COVID-19, there's no way to avoid COVID-19, among other things. It's helped to kind of spur the difficult conversations among all of us about race relations, but it just really put a big crack in the foundation of our society, and it allowed for deeply rooted inequities to bubble up to the surface that pretty much none of us can ignore. So these are the things that we've been talking about as a Black Caucus for a very long time. And so now I feel as a chairman that now we have, we're in a moment that we can leverage some of what we already know. And it wasn't about what it should be, it was just how to go about making sure that we keep all of our colleagues engaged with the Black Caucus agenda. It's my brainchild. I've not had sleep in about 2 months, a little longer than that we've been consistently rolling out pillars to address these inequities. And we have 4 pillars, John, that we've come up with that wasn't very difficult to do when you began to look at the data and the statistics. But we wanted to make sure that all of our colleagues learned along the way with us what we already knew, but we wanted to make sure that it was factual. And so we started out by having a retreat. We gathered up quite a bit of data, some that was so shocking, legislation that's actually laws that's put on the books that was never implemented. ideas that it showed volleyed. It may have passed the Senate one year, it failed in the House. It failed in the Senate the next time it came up, but it passed the House. It was just this volley concept of it never becoming a law and getting to the governor. And this has been going on my entire tenure. And I would imagine that's the reason why the late Harold Washington and his colleagues in the 60s decided to create the Black Caucus. And so our first pillar is criminal justice reform, um, police accountability, and violence reduction. And that's pretty much come from this movement of the George Floyd incident, but so many other lives prior to George Floyd and since George Floyd that have been murdered at the hands of the police in the Black community. And so we wanted to start there with police accountability and continue on the work that we had already begun in criminal justice reform, but then to also put a lens on violence reduction, because in our communities, there's such a high rate of violence. In fact, 92% of children living in high crime census tracts live in African American communities. And so we knew that there was a job that had to be done, that we could not continue just to put money in the budget for violence prevention. Community organizations apply for the resources, millions of dollars goes out the door, yet our communities remain the same. There isn't much difference with that type of resources that we were putting in the community. Our second pillar is education and workforce development, which of course is near and dear to my heart. And we know that if a child is born into a poverty-stricken community and they're African American, that they'll be less likely to read when they arrive in kindergarten. And they have all these data and stats to show that they're less likely to attain a higher education and et cetera. So my goal here is to take a parent and walk them through the Illinois public education system from birth to 20, from preschool to 20, what it looks like for your child to go to preschool, K through 12 to higher ed. And then once they're at higher ed, if they decide that attaining a college degree is not for them for whatever reason, if it's too expensive or they're not being motivated by their school counselor or anyone else in the family to attain a degree, and they choose to go out into the workforce, that they have the skill set to be able to do so, and that we as an institution help them with that craft so that they can be successful, and then create the jobs on the back end so that they can attain good employment, not minimum wage employment, but employment that they could successfully grow and raise a family if they so choose to do so. And then our third pillar is economic access, equity, and opportunity. This pillar is so very important because if you don't have economic stability, then you pretty much don't have much else. You're born poor, you never have a chance to get out of that cycle. And it's a vicious cycle that Black Americans have had to endure for as long as we've been in America. And so we're looking at housing, land use. We're looking at the procurement process. We have a $34.5 billion state budget, yet the procurement process funds do not reach Black business. There's always some voucher created so that you don't have to reach minority goals. We have a business enterprise program that isn't accountable to anyone. So whether or not they're reaching the 20% goals, there's no sanctions if these companies don't. And what they continue to do is be renewed. Billions of dollars are going out the door, not much of that going to the Black community, meaning 2% in some places, 4% in other places, very low percentages. And then we also, our fourth and final pillar would be healthcare and human services, which again, COVID showed us that Black people were unhealthy pretty much the most. And one of the things there is just that women being pregnancy showed that even the mortality rate of women are dying giving birth in the Black community. And that 3.4 times more African Americans are dying to COVID than any other race. And so, healthcare now, really, if you're not healthy, is very difficult to function. So you're not healthy, you live in a poor environment, you're unable to gain access to employment, and you're unable to read. Uh, the choices or the options for you are few to have a successful living, being African American. And we're working really hard to engage our colleagues so that veto session is approaching November 17th. Through the 19th, and then December 1st through the 3rd. And our goal is to have legislative intent for each pillar so that we've honed into a lot of these challenges, systemic racism, where we know it, where it's rooted. And then we've used quite a bit of our experts. We use researchers, we've used best practices in other states, and we've had subject matter hearings every single week in each pillar with our colleagues. And so it's been wonderful. The opportunity to take a look and take this deep dive with our colleagues it's been really rewarding. So I'm hoping that we have good success this veto session.
Well, when you, at one of the press conferences announcing this package, you said, this is the moment that I have dreamed of, that I have prayed for, that I have worked towards my entire life. And you also said, this is a time when I stand on my parents' shoulders and their parents' shoulders. We're finally here today. Do you feel like that the stars have lined up, that something big and productive can happen this year?
I do, and I ad-libbed. That was not even a part of my noted speech, but it was what I felt in my spirit, and I was taking away that moment with this is the reason. You know, we live our lives not knowing our purpose. I get emotional sometimes because but we live our lives trying to figure out where and the why. And I would often go, well, what am I doing here at 29 years old? Like nobody looks like me. I have, there was one other African American woman. Her name was Margaret Smith, and she was older than my great grandmother. And I was so alone. And I would always go, well, why am I here? What should I be doing? And my full 22-year career, it just hit me in that very moment. Every room that I've stepped into that I was ignored, every debate that I entered with passion, but I left the room being labeled as the angry Black woman. For every opportunity that I was overlooked, I just felt like it all came to that very moment. And I wanted to acknowledge my family, and I wanted to acknowledge all of our families who have paved the way for us to continue to grow and become better human beings. And that's my goal right now, is to ensure that there will be Black Americans unborn that would have a better chance at life, just because racism isn't what it is today and rooted into our government and our institutions as it is.
And it feels like this process has been a very educational one in terms of bringing on board, many people who maybe have not been as familiar with the struggles of Black Americans, Black Illinoisans. And I know there's been strong support from the governor, the speaker, the Senate president. So it does feel like there may be a window of opportunity this year to pass something quite significant.
It does. And, I think what really helped me to see that this was a moment that we have to push together is when the George Floyd incident happened. As the Joint Black Caucus, which is Black elected officials on the federal, state, county, and city level, when we come together, we decided to have what we call days of actions. And we went out and we protest and said, you know, this has to change. We've got to do things very differently. President Harmon attended all of those protests with us, as well as our governor attended all of those protests with us. And I wanted to know how much further would they go. And so I had conversations with the both of them, and they were pretty much moved by what they saw. There were so many people, John, that didn't look like me at all, that I was hand in hand with. I was standing by, and they had signs that said Black Lives Matter, and they were chanting enough is enough, and they were saying that democracy isn't what it should be. And they were not Black. They were all walks of life, all different ages, and it was so inspirational to me. That's when I knew that something had to be done, because the whole nation is calling on us to not be blindsided, not to continue to live in a society where we ignore racism because we think this is just how it's supposed to be and how any race should be belittled or lowered. And this is all marginalized communities. Of course, the Black Caucus is taking the lead, but in our conversations, it's going to help all of those who've been marginalized. It's going to assist all poor people who have laws against them that doesn't allow them to be more fruitful and give them more opportunities to climb out of the poverty that they were born in. So it does extend itself beyond just Black America, but I believe that it was our time to make sure that we did something about it that would ultimately help many people. And so I'm grateful to be in this position at this time in life, and be given the opportunity to be the state Senate Majority Leader, and to sit in rooms and be at tables that we have been traditionally not allowed to do so that I could have a voice and represent the Black community. But it's nothing like sitting next to your colleagues who have had a different life's journey and be able to have a conversation with them and to leave the room on one accord. It's the ultimate feeling. And I'm very grateful for that. And I'm hoping by engaging them through these subject matter hearings that they understand our approach and understand why we're approaching it from this perspective.
Well, I don't think you're up this cycle, but you know, you're of course connected to the campaign. We're 2 weeks, I think, from today from an election. What is your sense of the mood of the state? What are voters interested in? What are they focused on? What are they frightened about? What are they hopeful about?
Well, I think that we did a really good job with the census. I'll start with the census because census count controls so much of the elections in some ways, right? And so we did a lot of information, given this COVID crisis that we're in that has really changed uh, a lot of our lives. Thank God we're such resilient people, but just holding on to the values and the principles that we do hold during this COVID crisis, and letting people know the importance of the census count and how revenues flow from the federal government down to the state level and out into the municipalities was just this educational opportunity. Beyond that, the election cycle itself just kind of trickled on in and the conversation just continued. I don't see just directly here in Illinois there being much change other than the fair tax that we are pushing and supporting. The misinformation of the commercials, I guess they're doing what they're supposed to do if they're trying to defeat it. But I think it's so important to just be honest to people and give them the facts instead of skewing it with some unrealistic and untruths. But the fair taxes, we're only one of the states left that do not have a fair tax or a progressive tax. If you make 25, 30, $35,000 a year, you're paying just as much as the millionaire who's making a couple million a year. So it shouldn't be that way. And we're trying to level the tax base so that people pay for what level of income that they actually bring in. So if your income level is less than 250,000 a year, then the fair tax doesn't affect you in any way. And in fact, it would be a help to you because you would be paying less taxes. It's only those who make a higher threshold should be paying a little more. And so the burden wouldn't be just on the low income and middle income families. So the fair tax is really a big item for this election. We do have some congressional races that we're looking at, but I tell you, the drawing of the map, which will be indicated by the census population, is really important and will dictate the next 10 years beyond this November election. So I just wanted to share that census information because as young people in college, we may not think about, well, why do I need to be counted? Because it's affecting your education in a large way and the amount of resources that will come to you. And beyond that, when you're done with college as a young adult, the census tract lasts for a full 10-year period. So you will be impacted in some way. And so I think we're in good shape with the elections. And again, I am up for re-election and I'm unopposed and I have been for quite a while. And I hope that's just a reflection of my compassion and the work that I'm doing in my district.
Okay, great. Well, let's talk for a second about the fair tax. I mean, what are the fiscal consequences of it either passing or not passing? Some have said that if it doesn't pass, the governor is going to have to effectively go back to the drawing board and come up with a substantially different fiscal plan with probably fairly deep spending cuts across state government. Is that your assessment of what would happen if it's defeated?
Yes, that's true. The governor, so before we knew that we were going to run into this COVID crisis, the Pritzker administration had just come into following an administration where we had a budget impasse for years and our debt had increased significantly and we were not in good financial shape. The governor worked really hard to make sure that we had a balanced budget and that he personally went to Wall Street to have conversations so that our bond rating could look better. And he's looking at this from so many different angles on paying our pension debt, all of our liabilities, plus our unpaid bills as well. And so for COVID to hit, it's pretty much put a big damper in our fiscal resources that we had within the budget that we're in. We actually had to spend money that was not allocated for a pandemic. And so we were already going back to the drawing board to see how we can make that adjustment. But now if the fair tax doesn't pass, it was really like the resources that we knew we could use to help close the gaps and close the loopholes and help bring us to a better bond rating so that we could do more capital, which would help spur the economy, put people back to work, and create greater opportunities because our bond rating would look better. We'd be able to pay down some pension debts. We'd be able to put more money into education and make sure the evidence-based funding model is actually funded at $350 million new dollars each year as we required in the law. And so if we don't have the fair tax, it's just where do we make that revenue up from? We're such a state that's heavily reliant on our state revenues coming in from a tax structure, but yet we're not really keeping up with the cost that it takes to run the state. And the little word, that little 3-letter word, tax, people always, I don't want my taxes to go up. It's just a scary thing. But really, we've not kept at a good pace. And then again, the fair tax would be an opportunity to make sure that everyone just paid their worth, their fair share. And we're not on equal playing fields when a family of 4 is working and living on minimum wage, and they're paying the same amount of taxes that a CEO of a corporate Fortune 500 company. That's just not fair. So we want to make sure that not only do we grow our state's economy, but yet we pay down our debt and that people have a fair shot to move from low income and middle class families.
Great. Senator, we've received some questions from our audience. And the first one is Sabrina from Carbondale, is wondering about, connected to all this, the prospects for higher education funding. I guess the concern is that if revenues are tight, that oftentimes higher education is one of the first on the chopping block. What is your sense of higher education funding in Illinois going forward?
Well, so during that budget impasse, I was very challenged and bothered with the fact that we were not meeting our obligations to our universities, and we were not funding the MAP grant as we should, and all those other challenges that we face. I carried legislation for years to constantly increase the MAP spend so that students would have more income. And so I want her to know that that's a big push for the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus. It is a part of our agenda to rid systemic racism. We want to make sure that all of those who wants to go to college have a chance, and we're actually pushing for free tuition. Free tuition is one of our big areas that we want to push to make sure that everyone has a chance. What we found as we've been diving into free tuition is done a little differently in different states. And we also found that depending on the amount of cost of tuition per institution varies. So if you are attending a high-end school where tuition is $67,000, $70,000 a year, but yet another young person is at a school where tuition is $20,000, $30,000 a year, how do we balance that out in terms of free tuition? And so there's some formulas we're looking at. We're trying to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to go to college if they so desire. So we're working really hard to make sure that higher education is not going to receive those devastating cuts.
Lorraine from Carbondale wants to know about the prospects for ethics reform in the General Assembly. What is your sense of that?
Oh yes, we will have ethics reform during veto session. We've been working, oh gosh, so much transpired that was like the unexpected. And it just kept coming and kept coming. We did establish some Senate rules that we could just within the Senate. We also established a ethics commission. They've been meeting every single month since January. And now they have some recommendations and findings that they brought back for our Senate Democrat caucus just last month. And we convene around those areas. So we're really beginning to now hone in and narrow into what the language would look like for ethics reform. So you can be best assured that we will have ethics reform next month in veto session.
Well, Senator, I noticed on your website that there is a Kimberly Lightford Saturday University. Tell us about that, how it started. And I think it's for 5th through 8th graders, kind of basic skills education. Tell us about that program.
Oh, John is one of my favorites. And so Uplift Our Future is, I started that about 17, 18 years ago. And it's everything that involves youth development, from back to school events to college fairs, to supplemental services programs. And I was supporting Black Star Project. The creator, his name was Philip Jackson. He passed on just 2 years ago, and I just kept this program going. But Phil Jackson created the Saturday University concept, and he approached me about all of the schools in my district and showed me data where kids were underachieving in reading and math by the third grade. And so we started out with third grade boys. He particularly started out with third grade African American boys. And so, of course, I said, well, why don't we expand that to be boys and girls? And then let's go to middle school and let's target a period from 5th through 8th grade. I learned through my own research that when kids arrive in high school, the high school dropout rate was constantly growing because they were not prepared to be a freshman in high school. And by sophomore year, they were just uninterested or burned out or felt like they couldn't keep up. So I told him it was our duty to make sure that we grabbed these young people in middle school and we provided the supplemental services that they need. In a crowded classroom, teacher doesn't have the opportunity to not only teach the kids, but to also grab the children who are lagging behind and get them up to the level of all the other kids in the classroom. And that's what the Saturday school does. It provides 10 Saturdays in a row, 3 hours from 10 to 1, where they come in and they receive supplemental services in reading, math, and writing. And we have teachers who are either retired teachers or they're student teaching to actually teach these classes. They rotate. Another brainchild of mine, I just created a schedule where they have 5 classes, they rotate, they have homeroom, they have a snack, and then I bring in professionals who talks about their careers so that kids could not only know of what mom does at work or what dad does, but to come in and talk to them about becoming entrepreneurs and to talk to them about the various positions in law enforcement. For example, the state police were kind enough to come, but I had the state police who are back in the administrative offices so that they can understand that there's more to being a police than just being in the police car on the street. And so I have this who's who come in every week to share with them their careers. And so it's been going on for a very long time. It's a free program. Parents do not have to pay anything. And I would compete with the Huntington or Sylvan Learning Center at any time. They're very expensive. A lot of families can't afford it, but their kids need the additional support. And we've had praise reports for years about how we've moved kids and caught them up and actually exceeded kids who were doing well. So it's been a blessing to have the Saturday University.
Great. Well, Senator, finally, you're involved in some hard issues and a pretty high intensity lifestyle. What do you do to relax? How do you unwind? Sports, relaxing, reading, music. How do you relax?
You know, John, I forgot how to relax. I didn't. But I know for me, I love all types of music. So even when I'm in the office, I have music on, I have candles lit, I have my waterfall going. So when people come in my office, they're like, oh, wow, this is so zen. I feel so comfortable. So I have to relax all day. But I love interior design. And so that's my little part-time niche of what I do. I design for office space, for homes. My husband and I do some real estate where we flip houses. Our goal is to have our own HGTV show. So that's what I'm working. That's what I'm working. So thank you for asking. That's what I do. And I love my family. I have a close-knit, small family, constantly growing. So I've got 5 great nephews and nieces at this point. So I just keep my family and my closest friends around me.
Great. Well, Senator, thank you so much for your time. It's really been a delight to talk to you. And when travel allows, we'd love to coax you down to Southern Illinois and have you relax down here for a weekend and meet with students and talk about these issues that you've been such a pioneer on over the years.
Oh, thank you. I would love to come. The last time I was at Southern Illinois University, I won't tell you what all we did. I just won't tell you, but it was a good time. So I'll be back.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And thanks to all of
Thank
you for watching another edition of Understanding Our New World. This interview can be seen tomorrow on our YouTube channel. Please watch, and please continue to support the Institute, where we keep the legacy of Paul Simon alive and well. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.